Hello friends, so today's video is going to be a non-spoiler book review for Belladonna by Adeline Grace. I will have timestamps down below that coordinate with specific topics that we'll be chatting about in the review. So I'll start, of course, with the synopsis, what the book is about. After that, I'll segue into the aesthetic. That's not typically something I talk about with a book, but with this one, I almost feel like it's necessary and it definitely needs its own conversation point. After that, we'll get into pacing, themes, and then at the end we'll discuss whether or not this is maybe a book for you. Jumping into it and starting with the synopsis. So at the beginning of the story, very quickly, it's revealed to us that our main character, Signa, cannot die. She, as a baby, was killed alongside the rest of her family and a lot of other people, but when Death Personified came to bring her across, he saw that instead of seeing her the last glimpses of her life, he saw bits of her future. And then from there, the story takes off. This woman, it's actually really sad because so much of her life has been plagued with people around her dying, and then she moves from one guardian to the next. She lost her family when she was young, and now she's kind of having to live with other parental figures, and a lot of them, because her family was wealthy and well off, a lot of them don't really care about her. They just care about the potential fortune that they might gain by being associated with her. She's never really had the opportunity to get to live her life freely. And she doesn't even know really that her life is unusual in a lot of ways, or that there are things about her life that are honestly wrong and tragic and sad. She doesn't know it's out of the ordinary because she's never known anything else. Typically I would go into the setting, but here I actually wanted to talk about the aesthetic because I think the setting fits within it, as does the tone of the story. As far as the physical place and time of this book, we are in what is basically very proper English society at a time when you have to really think about exactly how you're sipping your tea and how you're sitting and what you're wearing and what colors you're wearing and what's proper if you're going to this place at this time, coupled with this feeling of it being a gothic horror fantasy. That sort of proper English setting juxtaposed to that gothic and disturbing feel and tone throughout the story, I think it created something that you just find the little details that shouldn't be scary or shouldn't be frightening end up being very scary. I'll read in a second a couple of passages that I think illustrate this really well, but a little bit more context. So our character, she doesn't know why she seems to have the ability to survive through things that should kill her. On top of that, she can see Death personified. She can see him, she can sense him, she can also see and sense spirits. And so there is a part in the story, and this isn't a spoiler, I won't give any specifics or anything like that, but there's a part in the story where she is communicating with something that she shouldn't have the ability to communicate with. And it's honestly pretty horrific. So if you don't know, this author also wrote all the Stars and Teeth and all the Tides of Fate, and I always said about that series that I really liked the descriptions of things. I'm very picky about descriptions because sometimes I think fantasy, it can have a tendency to lean a little bit into the self-indulgent territory where we just describe and describe and describe, and at some point you're like, okay, can we get back to the story or the characters or something else besides what this thing over here looks like that doesn't affect anybody or anything? So I can be pretty picky, but hers, I was always like, please give me more, describe more. And so I think some of these illustrate, despite how different they are from that other duology that she's written, because that duology is a seafaring adventure, and this is very different from that. I was still really excited about these descriptions, and I was very, very pleased to see how, even though it's so different, she still executed them really well. So this ties both to her fantastic ability to do that, as well as fits into the gothic horror feeling. So here's the example. It says, another violent shudder. The sores on her lips festered, turning from purple to a vicious black before they tore open with blood that ran from her lips, down her chin, and soiled the top of her gown. Her body spasmed, head bobbing in a furious and terrifying nod. And then right after that, it says, the spirit's neck bent and snapped as she jerked it from one direction to the next, shaking, nodding, twisting. Blood poured from her mouth, and the moonlight caught the pulp of her shredded tongue as she threw her head back and screamed a sound so shrill and grating it brought Signa to her knees. The wind whipped the water from the pond and tossed the croaking frogs into the trees, marring the clean branches with their blood. Death was before her, his shadow-like armor blocking her from the carnage. That part, I was reading that and I'm like, what the heck? Like, because I could visualize it and it was disgusting and it was so disturbing. And I was like, this is horrifying. but it was really well described. I mean, it is horrifying and it is disgusting, but I think the author, she was able to make me feel like, ugh, about this part, and she does that throughout. And then sometimes it's not that in your face. It's not that over the top. There are other moments that are simple. There's a passage where our character is running through the hallway in this very beautiful place that at this point seems kind of haunted. So our main character is walking through this place, and she just feels like the paintings, these elegant paintings of the different family members, she just feels like their eyes are watching her. And I know that that's been done before, but it fits so well into this, and it establishes, again, that aesthetic so well. The plot line itself, it's not just this one girl who sometimes sees death and creepy things happen. It's not like that. There is a set plot line. We have a murder mystery, or a murder we're trying to prevent, but it seems inevitable mystery. Our main character is trying to figure out if there is someone who is trying to cause harm to someone that she cares about, and if so, who and why. So you really do have a who done it or who might possibly do it. And I thought I'd gotten it. I was like, I'm paying close attention. I had a different color tab for a couple of moments where I'm like, it's totally this. This is what it is. And I was wrong. And I don't think you have to be wrong in order to enjoy anything with any kind of a mystery. But I was tricked. I totally thought I had it, because I was like, oh, this other thing is really obvious. And then I'm like, it's not that obvious thing. It's this thing over here. And then it was like, you don't have any idea what you're talking about. You're just wrong. And I just really liked that I was wrong. Maybe some of you will pick this up and you'll piece it all together. I thought I was so smart. And I really like when authors are like, just kidding, you're stupid, actually. I like when that happens. The other side to this story is what I'm going to call a beguiling romance. It is a subplot. This is not, I would say, entirely a story focused on the romance. The character's always doing what she can to try and help the person that she's trying to help, but there is a romantic subplot, but it was the kind of romantic subplot where I was like, am I supposed to be getting romantic tension right now from what's happening? The best thing I can compare it to is Phantom of the Opera. So to summarize, gothic horror, fantasy, murder, mystery, Phantom of the Opera, beguiling romance vibes. That's why I said I didn't feel like describing the setting would be enough. I didn't feel like describing the tone necessarily would be enough. It just felt like all of these things needed to be combined, because it's really, I think, what made this book stand out to me. It wasn't quite like anything else I've picked up in a while. I won't talk about the pacing of the story all that much, just because I don't really think there's a whole lot to say. There's always something intriguing happening, and so I always wanted to turn the page. Sometimes that intriguing thing would be the character discovering more about herself, and I'll get into the themes in a moment, but discovering more about what she wants from life and what has been abnormal about her life thus far and the things that have been unfair. And then also just sometimes it's social things and, oh, I have to meet with this person today. And then other times it's, oh my gosh, there's this horrifying, violent thing happening right in front of me. Or basically our character just died for a few minutes so she can talk to death, and then now other things, she can come back to life and then carry on about her day. There was always something that made me want to turn the page. And then of course there's the murder mystery plot line. And so there's the, what the heck, who is it? Who is it? So what might be typically a boring social gathering of a few people for tea or something, maybe that would be boring normally, but then you're like, is it one of these people? So then you're always trying to pay attention, and I think it made the book fly by. Despite all of everything I've said thus far, which I think primarily is a lot of praise, none of that is really what took this book to the next level or surprised me about this book. The thing that really took it to the next level was how the themes were handled. So I'm very picky when anything to do with death is a theme. I've mentioned this before, especially when you're talking about what happens after someone dies. I don't really think that was necessarily the focus, although death is personified in this story and there are aspects of the story that talk about death. I would say feeling loss, having to grieve, and having to be left behind as somebody who is still alive when you've lost someone you care about, those sorts of things, how those were dealt with, I thought was really well done. And I was already like, oh, I'm enjoying this. But on page 40, there's a passage that I just thought stood out, and I wanted to read it really quick. So they're describing the way somebody died kind of slowly, and it was a painful death. And the person says, you know, I apologize, I probably shouldn't have said that. And the main character saying this says, I take no offense, sir. It's just that I sometimes find myself wondering why death is so needlessly cruel. And then the person she's talking to says, I think for someone in as much pain as she was in, death might have felt like a reprieve. That I thought hit really hard, because if you've ever... Sorry, I don't want to get emotional right now. I know a lot of you know that I was my father's caretaker, and it was very difficult. And it's a hard thing to grapple with, that feeling of you would do anything to make a person feel better, to have them live healthy, be healthy again. But if that's not an option, your mind starts to genuinely think maybe they do feel better now that they've passed. Maybe it is a reprieve, like it said here. And so there is this sense of relief, and I think a lot of people feel really guilty for feeling that. But I really appreciated that this book very quickly was like, I know that it can be cruel when someone is alive and they're suffering, but sometimes it's in death that they know peace. So I really appreciated that. It was simple. It wasn't like it elaborated over and over and over again on this topic, but I thought how that was touched on was really well done. But then the main character says, perhaps, but I don't believe that makes death any less cruel. And the person says, and why do you say that? And she says, because death is only a reprieve for the dead. It cares little for those it leaves behind. And so I'll mention another passage about grief here in a second, but I think both of these lines in this brief conversation illustrate very well what it's like when somebody is dying and you want that peace for them, but also when you are still alive, then there is that sense of loss and that difficulty that comes with that person's not with you anymore. So I thought that passage was done very, very well. Elaborating a little bit more on grief later in the book, there's a passage where our main character is talking to somebody who has lost a person they cared about, and it says, in the narrative, it says, as someone with a different and overall frustrating experience with death, she took a great deal of care with her words. And then she says, grief is a strange thing, for no two people experience it the same. And again, it's just one sentence. It's not like the most profound thing, but I just really appreciated those moments because as brief as they are, I think they capture grief and loss. I think they capture them perfectly. Another theme in this that I can't elaborate on too much because I think it definitely would get into spoiler territory is just the claiming happiness for yourself. As far as whether the book is for you or not, I think that's something that's important to add is if you're somebody who is a character-driven reader, I typically am a character-driven reader. This is not, I would say, a character-driven story, but that's not to say that there is no substance to the characters themselves. I think all the characters were distinct. I think everybody, I wasn't like, who's this character again? I knew who was who, and there's quite a few people that end up being presented to you. So I thought that the character work was well done. I just wouldn't say it's the focus. So if you're somebody who is an extreme character-driven reader, where you do want them to be the focus all the time, you really only focus in on our main character and then kind of death. But the other characters you get to know through our main character, but I still wouldn't categorize it as character-driven. Also, I would say as far as age range goes, this is categorized as young adult, but feels a little bit perhaps more mature than what you might find with some young adult, because of course young adult starts at age 12. So if you're looking for something that leans kind of on the higher end of young adult / new adult, I think that this one's worth picking up, but if you're somebody who likes the younger end, you like adventure, you don't like the creepy vibes, this is probably not going to be the book for you. Let me know if this was not on your radar, if you're now interested in picking it up. And if you have read it and you want to mention anything specific, just make sure to write spoilers in your comments so nobody who hasn't read it yet is spoiled. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. If you do pick it up, I hope you enjoy it. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all later. Bye.